I never imagined that moving to Riverside Glen, California would turn me into the neighborhood villain. But here I was, sitting in my living room with angry voicemail after angry voicemail piling up on my phone. All because I did what any reasonable person would do when they saw a massive safety hazard being constructed in their community without proper oversight. My name is Cameron Harris, and I had been living in this seemingly perfect subdivision for about 8 months when everything went sideways. Riverside Glen was one of those master-planned communities about 45 minutes outside of Sacramento, the kind of place where the houses all looked vaguely similar, but different enough that you could pretend there was some individuality. Every lawn was manicured, every mailbox matched, and the HOA rules were thick enough to stop a bullet. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in late April. I was working from home, as I usually did since my job in software development allowed for remote work, when I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy machinery rolling down our street. I looked out my office window and saw a flatbed truck carrying what appeared to be playground equipment, followed by 2 more trucks loaded with lumber, concrete bags, and various construction materials. Now, I had been to enough HOA meetings to know that any kind of construction in the community required approval, permits, and about 17 different forms to be filled out in triplicate. I had gone through that nightmare myself when I wanted to add a small pergola to my backyard. It took 3 months of back and forth with both the HOA and the county just to build a simple shade structure. So seeing all this equipment roll up to the common area at the end of Maple Grove Drive immediately raised red flags. I grabbed my jacket and walked down the street to see what was happening. The common area was a decent-sized patch of grass, maybe half an acre, that the HOA maintained for community gatherings. There had been talk at the last few meetings about adding a playground, something the families with young kids had been pushing for. But I distinctly remembered the discussion being tabled pending budget approval and proper planning. When I arrived at the site, there were already about 5 workers unloading materials. A woman I recognized immediately was standing there with a clipboard, directing traffic like she was conducting a symphony. Her name was Patricia Whitmore, and she was the HOA president, a position she had held with an iron grip for the past 6 years. Patricia was in her early 50s, with that particular haircut that seemed to be issued along with HOA board positions, blonde with aggressive highlights and cut in a severe bob that somehow defied both gravity and good taste. "Excuse me, Patricia," I called out as I approached. "What's going on here?" She turned to me with that smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Oh, Cameron, good morning. We're finally getting our playground installed. Isn't it exciting?" I looked at the pile of equipment being unloaded. There was a massive jungle gym structure, several swing sets, a merry-go-round, and what appeared to be a rock-climbing wall. "This looks pretty extensive," I said carefully. "I thought the playground discussion was still in the planning phase." Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "We got a wonderful deal from a contractor friend of mine. He could do it this week or not until late summer, so the board voted to move forward." "When did the board vote on this?" I asked. I tried to attend most meetings and definitely read the minutes when I could not make it. "Emergency meeting last Thursday," she said, already turning her attention back to the workers. "We sent out an email." I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my inbox. Nothing. "I didn't get any email about an emergency meeting." "Well, we sent it to all board members and interested parties," Patricia said, her tone suggesting that I was neither. "Anyway, it's approved and happening, so if you will excuse me, I need to make sure these gentlemen know where everything goes." I stood there for a moment, watching as workers began marking off areas with stakes and string. Something felt off about the whole situation, but I could not quite put my finger on it. I walked back home and immediately pulled up the HOA bylaws on my computer. According to Section 7, subsection 3, any construction project over $5,000 required a vote at a regular meeting with at least 2 weeks' notice to all homeowners. An emergency meeting could only be called for actual emergencies, like emergency repairs to common infrastructure. A playground was not an emergency. I decided to call my neighbor, George Chen, who lived 2 houses down and had served on the HOA board before Patricia took over. George was a retired civil engineer and had a good head on his shoulders when it came to community matters. "George, it's Cameron. Do you have a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" I explained what I had seen at the common area. George was quiet for a moment before he spoke. "That doesn't sound right. Any major construction needs proper permits from the county. When I was on the board, we could not even replace the community mailboxes without going through the permitting process. That's what I was thinking, I said. Do you think I should check with the county? George hesitated. Look, Cameron, you seem like a good guy, so I'm going to give you some advice. Patricia does not take kindly to people questioning her authority. When I was on the board and started pushing back on some of her decisions, she made my life miserable until I resigned. Be careful. I just want to make sure everything is done properly, I said. If something happens and someone gets hurt because corners were cut, that's on all of us. You're not wrong, George agreed, but don't say I didn't warn you. After hanging up with George, I went to the Riverside County Planning Department website and looked up the permit search function. I entered the address for our community common area and ran a search for any recent permits. Nothing came up. I tried several variations of the address, thinking maybe it was filed under a different format. Still nothing. Just to be thorough, I called the county planning office directly. A woman named Sandra answered on the third ring. Hi, I'm calling to inquire about permits for a construction project at 2847 Maple Grove Drive in the Riverside Glen subdivision, I said. I heard typing on the other end. Let me check that for you. What type of construction? A playground installation in the common area. More typing. I'm not seeing any permits filed for that address or for the Riverside Glen HOA in the past 6 months. When did they submit the application? That's what I'm trying to find out, I said. So there's definitely no permit on file for this project? No, sir. If they're doing construction, they need to come in and file for the appropriate permits. Depending on the scope of the project, they might need building permits, safety inspections, and approval from our planning commission. What happens if they build without permits? Sandra's voice took on a more serious tone. That would be a code violation. If you're aware of unpermitted construction, you can file a complaint with our Code Enforcement Division. They'll send an inspector out to assess the situation. I thanked Sandra for her help and sat back in my chair. This was turning into a bigger mess than I thought. Part of me wanted to just let it go, to not be that guy who causes trouble in the neighborhood. But another part of me, the part that had grown up watching my dad work as a building inspector, knew that permits existed for good reasons. They ensured that structures were safe, that they met code requirements, and that someone qualified had reviewed the plans. A playground where kids would be climbing, swinging, and playing needed to be safe above all else. I decided to give Patricia one more chance before taking it further. I walked back down to the common area where work was now in full swing. Workers were digging holes for the support posts of the jungle gym, and I could see that they were not going very deep, maybe 2 feet at most. Patricia, can I talk to you for a minute? I asked. She looked annoyed at the interruption but stepped away from the construction zone. What is it, Cameron? I'm very busy here. I just want to make sure all the proper permits have been filed for this project. I checked the county website and didn't see anything on record. Her expression hardened. The permits are being handled. You don't need to worry about it. It's just that the county told me there's nothing filed under the HOA name or the address, and I'm concerned that... Are you questioning my competence? Patricia's voice rose enough that a couple of workers glanced over. I have been running this HOA for 6 years without any issues, and now you, who have been here for less than a year, think you know better than me? I'm not questioning your competence. I just want to make sure everything is done by the book so there are no problems down the line. The only problem I see is a busybody who needs to mind his own business, Patricia snapped. This is HOA business, which means it's being handled by the board. If you have concerns, you can bring them up at the next general meeting. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. She turned on her heel and marched back to the construction area, effectively dismissing me. I stood there for a moment, feeling my face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. Several of the workers were definitely watching now, probably wondering what the argument was about. I walked back home, my mind made up. If Patricia was not going to ensure this was done properly, then I had to. I went back to my computer and found the code enforcement complaint form on the county website. I filled it out carefully, providing the address, the nature of the construction, and noting that I had verified there were no permits on file. I hit submit and received an automated response saying an inspector would be assigned to the case within 3 business days. For the rest of that day and the next, I watched as the playground took shape. The workers were fast, I had to give them that. By Wednesday afternoon, the main jungle gym structure was up, the swings were installed, and they were pouring concrete footings around some of the equipment. It looked impressive, I had to admit, but every time I looked at it, all I could think about was whether those posts were deep enough, whether the concrete mix was right, whether the equipment met current safety standards. On Thursday morning, I was working at my desk when I heard a vehicle pull up outside. I glanced out the window and saw a white county truck with code enforcement printed on the side. A man in his 30s got out, carrying a clipboard and wearing a high-visibility vest. He walked down toward the common area. My phone rang about 10 minutes later. It was a number I did not recognize, but I answered anyway. "Is this Cameron Harris?" a woman's voice demanded. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Patricia Whitmore. What the hell did you do?" "I'm not sure what you mean," I said, though I knew exactly what she meant. "There's a code enforcement officer here shutting down our playground construction. He says someone filed a complaint. Was it you?" I took a breath. "Patricia, I asked you yesterday if the proper permits had been filed. You said it was being handled. I checked with the county and there were no permits on record. I had to report it." The string of words that came out of Patricia's mouth next would have made a sailor blush. I held the phone away from my ear as she ranted about betrayal, neighborhood cohesion, and my apparent desire to ruin everything for the children of Riverside Glen. "Patricia," I said when she finally paused for breath, "if the permits are in order, this will all get sorted out. The inspector will see that everything is fine and work can continue." "The permits were going to be filed next week," she said. "We were just getting ahead of the paperwork to take advantage of the contractor's schedule. That's not how it works, and you know it. You can't build first and permit later. This is your fault. When this gets out, everyone is going to know you're the one who destroyed the playground. I hope you're happy." She hung up before I could respond. I sat there, staring at my phone, wondering if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. I was not trying to destroy anything. I just wanted things done right. About an hour later, I walked back down to the common area. The workers were packing up their tools and loading equipment back onto the trucks. Yellow caution tape now surrounded the partially completed playground. The code enforcement officer was talking with Patricia, who looked like she was barely containing her rage. I stayed back, not wanting to get involved in that conversation. The officer left, and Patricia immediately pulled out her phone. I could see her pacing back and forth, gesticulating wildly as she talked to someone. The workers finished loading up and drove away, leaving behind a skeletal playground that looked somehow sad and unfinished. I went back home and tried to focus on work, but I kept checking my email and phone. Sure enough, by early afternoon, an email went out to the entire HOA membership. The subject line read, "Playground construction halted due to malicious complaint." I opened it with a sense of dread. Patricia had written a lengthy message explaining that the playground construction, which was generously being provided by a contractor friend at cost, had been shut down by the county due to a complaint filed by a vindictive resident who apparently hates children and community improvement. While she did not name me directly, she noted that the individual in question was seen arguing with board members at the construction site and later admitted to filing the complaint. The email went on to explain that the HOA would now have to go through the formal permitting process, which would delay the playground by months and potentially cost thousands of dollars in additional fees and contractor rescheduling costs. She ended with a call for all residents to attend an emergency meeting on Saturday morning to discuss how to handle residents who actively work against the community's best interests. My phone started ringing within minutes. The first call was from my next-door neighbor, Jennifer Martinez, a single mom with 2 kids under 10. "Cameron, please tell me you're not the one who reported the playground," she said. "Jennifer, there were no permits filed. That playground could have been dangerous." Dangerous? It looked fine to me. My kids were so excited about it. Do you know how hard it is to explain to a 7-year-old why the playground is wrapped in caution tape now? "I understand you're disappointed, but permits exist for a reason. What if something had been installed wrong and a kid got hurt?" What if, Jennifer said. "You know what's actually happening? Kids in this neighborhood have nowhere to play because someone decided to be the permit police." "Thanks a lot, Cameron." She hung up. Over the next few hours, I received 6 more calls and at least a dozen text messages, some from people I barely knew. Most were angry, some were confused, and a few were downright nasty. One text told me I should move if I hated the community so much. Another said they hoped I did not have kids because I clearly did not understand what it meant to be a parent. Only 2 messages were supportive. One was from George Chen, who simply said, "You did the right thing. Sorry it's blowing back on you." The other was from a guy named Marcus who lived on the other side of the development. He said he appreciated someone finally standing up to Patricia and her tendency to do whatever she wanted without following proper procedures. By Friday, the situation had escalated to the point where I could not walk to my mailbox without someone giving me dirty looks. A group of kids rode by on their bikes and one yelled, "Playground killer," as they passed. I felt like I was living in some kind of absurd reality where I was the villain for wanting construction to be done safely and legally. Saturday morning came, and I debated whether to attend the emergency meeting. Part of me wanted to hide in my house until this all blew over. But I knew that if I did not show up, Patricia would control the entire narrative. I needed to be there to defend my position, even if it meant facing an angry mob of neighbors. The meeting was held at the community center, a small building near the entrance of our subdivision that usually hosted yoga classes and book clubs. When I arrived, every seat was full and people were standing along the walls. I estimated at least 100 residents were there, which was about 4 times the normal attendance for HOA meetings. I found a spot along the back wall, trying to be inconspicuous. Several people noticed me and began whispering to their neighbors. I felt like I was back in high school, except instead of teenage drama, this was full-grown adults acting like I'd committed some heinous crime. Patricia called the meeting to order from the front of the room. She was flanked by 2 other board members, Donald Burke, a retired accountant who usually just nodded along with whatever Patricia said, and Susan Kellerman, a woman in her 40s who had always struck me as reasonable but seemed completely cowed by Patricia's domineering personality. "Thank you all for coming," Patricia began. "I know many of you are upset and confused about what happened with our playground project. I want to be transparent about the situation, so everyone understands what we're dealing with." She proceeded to give her version of events, which painted the board as hard-working volunteers trying to do something wonderful for the community, and painted me as an obsessive troublemaker who could not stand to see others happy. According to her telling, the permits were in process, and the construction was starting early to take advantage of favorable weather and contractor availability. Unfortunately, Patricia continued, one resident decided that his interpretation of the rules was more important than the desires of this entire community. That resident, Cameron Harris, filed a complaint with the county that resulted in our project being shut down. All eyes turned to me. I felt my face getting hot, but I kept my expression neutral. "Now we're facing significant delays and additional costs," Patricia said. "The contractor has had to cancel our project and move on to other jobs. When we're finally able to get permits approved, we'll have to find a new contractor and likely pay significantly more. The board estimates this complaint will cost the HOA between $15,000 and $20,000 in additional expenses." A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone near the front said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "That comes out of our HOA dues. We're paying for his tantrum." Patricia nodded gravely. "Exactly, which is why we're proposing a special assessment of $200 per household to cover these unexpected costs. We'll be taking a vote on that today." I could not stay quiet anymore. I raised my hand. "I'd like to speak." Patricia's expression made it clear that she would rather eat glass, but with 100 witnesses, she could not very well deny me. "Fine. Cameron, you have the floor." I moved forward through the crowd, which parted reluctantly. I turned to face everyone, my heart pounding. I want to start by saying I understand why people are upset. I know families with kids were excited about the playground. I'm not against having a playground in our community. "Could have fooled me," someone muttered. "What I am against," I continued, "is cutting corners on safety. I worked in construction with my father growing up, and I saw firsthand what happens when people skip permits and inspections. Buildings collapse, structures fail, people get hurt or worse. Permits aren't just bureaucratic red tape. They ensure that what's being built is safe." "The playground was perfectly safe," Patricia interrupted. The contractor is licensed and experienced. Then filing for permits should have been easy, I said. But according to the county, no permits were ever filed or even applied for. They had no plans to review, no engineering reports to assess, nothing. That means if a child had been injured on that playground, the HOA would have been liable for allowing unpermitted construction. Donald Burke spoke up for the first time. The board would have handled the permits appropriately. You should have trusted us to manage HOA business. I asked Patricia directly about permits. I said. She told me it was being handled. When I checked with the county and found out nothing had been filed, I had a responsibility to report it. What if I had stayed silent and a child was seriously hurt? How would any of you feel then? You're being dramatic, Patricia said. Children play on playgrounds all the time without incident. On properly permitted and inspected playgrounds, I shot back, not on structures built without any oversight. I saw those workers digging post holes that looked maybe 2 feet deep. Depending on the soil conditions and the height of the structure, those posts might need to be 3 or 4 feet deep with proper concrete footings. Did anyone check? Did an engineer sign off on the plans, or were we just hoping for the best? A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. I could see doubt creeping into some expressions. Furthermore, I continued, according to our HOA bylaws, any project over $5,000 requires a vote at a regular meeting with 2 weeks' notice. Patricia claimed an emergency board meeting was held to approve this project. First, I never received notice of that meeting, and I'm a dues-paying homeowner who should be notified. Second, a playground is not an emergency. There was no legitimate reason to bypass the normal approval process. Susan Kellerman, the third board member, looked uncomfortable. Patricia said you were on the notification list. Check your records, I said. I'm happy to show my email inbox right now. No notification was sent to me, and I'd be willing to bet others here didn't receive it either. I didn't get any email about an emergency meeting, someone called out from the crowd. Others began nodding and murmuring in agreement. Patricia's face was turning red. This is not about meeting notifications. This is about you undermining the board and costing this community thousands of dollars. No, I said firmly. This is about the board trying to do an end run around proper procedures and getting caught. If you had filed for permits like you were supposed to, we'd have a playground right now. The county told me permit applications usually take 4 to 6 weeks to process. If you had started that process when the playground was first discussed 3 months ago, we'd be done by now. The delay is entirely the board's fault for not following proper procedures. The room had gone quiet. I could see people processing what I was saying, weighing it against Patricia's narrative. As for the special assessment, I continued, I'll be voting no, and I encourage everyone else to do the same. The board created this problem through mismanagement. HOA dues should not increase to cover the costs of the board's mistakes. If there are truly additional costs, they should come from the community improvement budget that's already allocated in our annual dues. Patricia looked like she wanted to strangle me. Are you quite finished? One more thing, I said. I'd like to make a motion that the board provides complete documentation of all communications regarding the playground project, including the claimed emergency meeting notice, any contractor quotes and agreements, and a full accounting of all money spent so far. As dues-paying members, we have a right to transparency. I second that motion, George Chen called out from somewhere in the crowd. Patricia had no choice but to acknowledge it. Fine. We'll provide documentation. Now, can we move on to the vote on the special assessment? The vote was contentious. Patricia called for a show of hands, and it was close enough that she had to do an actual count. In the end, the special assessment was voted down, 62 against to 51 in favor. Patricia looked furious, but there was nothing she could do about it. After the meeting, a few people came up to talk to me. Jennifer, my neighbor who had called angry earlier, approached hesitantly. Look, I'm still frustrated about the delay, but some of what you said made sense. I didn't think about the liability issues. I'm not trying to be difficult, I told her. I genuinely think this is the right thing for the community, even if it's unpopular. I get it, she said. I just hope we actually get a playground eventually, and this doesn't get buried in bureaucracy. It won't, I assured her. Once the permits are filed and approved, construction can start. It'll just be done right this time. Marcus, who had sent me a supportive text, introduced himself in person. He was a tall guy in his early 30s with an easy smile. That took guts standing up there. Patricia's been running this HOA like her personal fiefdom for years. It's about time someone pushed back. I feel like I just painted a target on my back, I admitted. You definitely did, Marcus said with a laugh. But some of us appreciate it. Patricia's gotten away with a lot of questionable decisions because most people don't want to rock the boat. Maybe this will make her think twice. I wished I shared his optimism. Over the next few weeks, life in Riverside Glen was tense. Patricia and her closest allies on the board maintained a campaign of cold hostility toward me. I would see her at the community mailbox or the store, and she would literally turn and walk the other way, rather than acknowledge my existence. Meanwhile, I started digging into the HOA's financial records, which were technically available to all homeowners upon request. What I found was troubling. Patricia had been writing checks from the HOA account to various contractors and service providers without the board approval that should have been required for expenses over a certain threshold. The playground contractor, a company called Riverside Recreation Systems, had been paid $15,000 before any work had even begun, allegedly as a deposit to secure the project. I brought my findings to George Chen, who had become an unofficial advisor in this whole mess. He looked over the documents I had printed out and shook his head. This is worse than I thought. When I was on the board, we had strict protocols about payments, nothing over $5,000 without a vote, and certainly not full payment up front. Is this illegal? I asked. Possibly, George said. At minimum, it's a violation of fiduciary duty. At worst, it could be embezzlement or fraud if there was any kickback arrangement. You should talk to a lawyer. I did not want to escalate things to lawyers and potential legal action, but I also could not ignore what I was seeing. I decided to approach Susan Kellerman, the board member who had seemed reasonable at the meeting. I called her and asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss some concerns about HOA finances. She agreed, though she sounded wary. We met at a Starbucks outside our neighborhood, neutral territory. Susan was a petite woman with brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She worked as a nurse and had 3 kids, which explained why she had volunteered for the board in the first place. I want to be upfront with you, I said after we had our drinks. I've been reviewing HOA financial records, and I'm seeing some expenditures that don't seem to follow proper procedures. Susan sighed. Patricia handles most of the financial stuff. Donald and I mostly just vote on whatever she recommends. That's part of the problem, I said gently. Board members have a fiduciary responsibility to oversee how HOA money is spent. You can't just rubber stamp everything without reviewing it. I showed her the documentation I had gathered. Checks written without apparent board approval, contracts signed without proper bidding processes, and the $15,000 payment to the playground contractor before any work was completed. Susan's expression grew more concerned as she reviewed the papers. I didn't know about half of these. Patricia usually just sends an email saying a bill needs to be paid and we approve it. I assumed she had done the due diligence. Susan, I think there might be some serious financial mismanagement happening, possibly worse. I don't want to cause more drama, but this needs to be addressed. If Patricia is making unauthorized expenditures from HOA funds, that's a legal issue. What are you suggesting? Susan asked, looking worried. I think the board needs to conduct a full financial audit. Bring in an independent accountant to review all the books for the past few years. If everything's above board, great. If not, it needs to be corrected. Susan was quiet for a long moment. Patricia is going to lose her mind if we suggest an audit. She'll see it as a vote of no confidence. It's not about confidence, I said. It's about accountability. Every well-run HOA should have regular audits. It's not personal. It's good governance. I'll talk to Donald, Susan said finally. But I can't promise he'll support this. He and Patricia go way back. A week later, Susan called me. I talked to Donald. He's not on board with an audit. He says it's too expensive and unnecessary. But I've been looking at the financial records more carefully, and Cameron, I think you're right. There are a lot of irregularities. What do you want to do? I asked. I'm going to call for a vote on an audit at the next board meeting. As a board member, I have that right. But I need homeowners to show up and support it. Patricia and Donald will vote no, so I'll be outvoted unless we can make the case to the general membership. The next board meeting was 3 weeks away. In the meantime, I started quietly talking to other homeowners, sharing my concerns about financial management and the need for transparency. Some people were receptive. Others told me I was on a witch hunt against Patricia, but enough people seemed concerned that I felt like we might have a chance. Then something happened that changed everything. I came home from grocery shopping on a Wednesday afternoon to find a certified letter in my mailbox. It was from a law firm representing the HOA. My stomach dropped as I opened it. The letter informed me that I was being fined $2,000 for violations of community harmony standards and actions detrimental to the HOA. It cited Section 12 of the CC and RS, which dealt with behavior that substantially interferes with other homeowners' use and enjoyment of the community. I read the letter 3 times, not quite believing it. They were fining me for reporting the unpermitted construction and raising questions about finances. The letter gave me 30 days to pay the fine or face additional penalties and potential legal action. I immediately called a real estate attorney named David Rothstein, whose name George had given me. His secretary squeezed me in for an appointment the next day. David was a man in his 60s with graying hair and a calm demeanor that immediately put me at ease. He read the letter from the HOA and then looked at the documents I had brought regarding the unpermitted playground and financial irregularities. This fine is retaliatory and almost certainly unenforceable, David said. They're trying to punish you for whistleblowing, essentially. The section of the CC and Rs they're citing is meant for things like excessive noise, harassment of neighbors, or property modifications that impact others. It's not meant to silence residents who raise legitimate concerns about HOA governance. So I don't have to pay it? I would not recommend paying it, David said. That could be seen as admitting wrongdoing. Instead, I'll draft a response on your behalf, pointing out that the fine is improper and threatening legal action if they continue with this retaliatory behavior. We'll also note that you're within your rights as a homeowner to report code violations and to review HOA financial records. Will that just make them angrier? I asked. Probably, David admitted. But you need to establish boundaries. If you let them intimidate you with bogus fines, they'll keep doing it. Bullies tend to back down when someone stands up to them, especially when that someone has a lawyer. David drafted a strongly worded response that he sent via certified mail to both the HOA board and their attorney. The letter made it clear that any further retaliatory actions would result in a lawsuit against the HOA and potentially against individual board members personally for breach of fiduciary duty and harassment. The response from Patricia came faster than I expected. She sent an email to the entire community saying that certain residents have become so obsessed with causing trouble that they are now threatening the HOA with frivolous lawsuits. She claimed that the fine assessed against me was entirely proper and that my refusal to pay it showed my contempt for community rules. But something else happened that I did not expect. After Patricia's email went out, I started getting calls and emails from other homeowners who had their own stories of problems with the board. One couple had been fined repeatedly for parking violations that they could prove never happened. Another homeowner had requested financial documents as allowed by the CC and Rs and had been stonewalled for months. Yet another had been threatened with fines when they questioned why a certain landscaping company kept getting contracts despite providing poor service. A pattern was emerging. Patricia had been running the HOA like a personal kingdom, and anyone who questioned her authority was punished. The playground issue had just been the breaking point that exposed everything else. Susan called me a few days before the board meeting. Cameron, I'm resigning from the board, effective at the next meeting. I can't be part of this anymore. But before I go, I'm going to make sure some things come to light. Can you be at the meeting? Absolutely, I said. The board meeting was on a Tuesday evening. Once again, attendance was unusually high, with probably 70 or 80 homeowners present. Word had spread that something significant was going to happen. Patricia called the meeting to order and tried to rush through the standard agenda items. But when it came time for board member reports, Susan asked to speak. I'm resigning from the board, she announced. But before I do, I need to share some concerns about HOA, financial management. Over the past month, I've been reviewing our financial records in detail, and I've found numerous irregularities. Patricia tried to interrupt. Susan, this is not the appropriate forum for... Actually, it is, Susan said firmly. This is a board meeting open to all homeowners, and they have a right to know how their dues are being spent. I've discovered that President Whitmore has been approving expenditures without proper board votes, has entered into contracts without the required bidding process, and has made payments to contractors before work was completed, which violates our own financial policies. The room erupted in conversation. Patricia was on her feet, her face red. This is completely inappropriate. You're making baseless accusations. They're not baseless, Susan said. She held up a thick folder. I have documentation of everything, and I'm calling for an immediate independent audit of all HOA finances for the past 5 years. Given the severity of what I've found, I believe it's necessary. I second that motion, George Chen called out. Patricia looked panicked now. This is a coup. This is politically motivated attacks from people who want to take over the board. Then you should welcome an audit, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. If everything is proper, an audit will prove that and clear your name. The only reason to oppose it would be if there's something to hide. Donald Burke, who had been silent, finally spoke. Patricia, maybe we should consider the audit. If it clears things up, don't you dare turn on me, Donald, Patricia snapped. After everything I've done for this community, this is how you repay me. The meeting descended into chaos. Multiple people were trying to talk at once. Patricia kept trying to regain control, but she had lost the room. Finally, Marcus stood up and made a motion to remove Patricia as HOA president pending the results of an independent audit. The motion was seconded by at least 5 different people. According to the bylaws, such a motion required a vote of the full membership, not just the board. Patricia tried to rule it out of order, but George pointed out the relevant bylaw section that allowed for removal of officers by majority vote when there was cause to believe they had violated their fiduciary duties. A vote was called. It was not even close. 82% of homeowners present voted to remove Patricia from the presidency. She would remain on the board as a regular member, but she no longer had authority over finances or day-to-day decisions. Patricia gathered her things, her hands shaking with rage. You'll regret this, all of you. This community is going to fall apart without my leadership, and it will be on your heads. She stormed out of the meeting. Donald, looking shell-shocked, followed her. Susan formally submitted her resignation, and the remaining homeowners voted to appoint George as interim president and Marcus as interim treasurer until a special election could be held. The audit was approved unanimously. George reached out to a CPA firm that specialized in HOA audits, and they agreed to begin work within 2 weeks. Over the next month, the auditors poured through 5 years of financial records. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Patricia had been systematically diverting HOA funds for years. The playground contractor, Riverside Recreation Systems, was owned by her brother-in-law. The landscaping company that kept getting contracts despite poor service was owned by her nephew. Numerous other contracts had gone to friends and family members, often at inflated prices, with Patricia likely receiving kickbacks. In total, the auditors estimated that between $70,000 and $90,000 of HOA funds had been misappropriated over the past 5 years. That money should have gone to community improvements, maintenance, and reserves, but instead had ended up in the pockets of Patricia and her associates. George called an emergency meeting to present the audit findings. Patricia did not attend, but Donald did, looking like he had aged 10 years. The mood in the room was somber as George walked through the auditor's report. I want to be clear, George said. This audit has uncovered serious financial crimes. The board has a legal obligation to report these findings to the appropriate authorities. We'll be filing a report with the Riverside County District Attorney's Office and also pursuing civil action to recover the stolen funds. What about the playground? Someone asked. Was that part of the fraud? The $15,000 paid to Riverside Recreation Systems appears to have been legitimate payment for equipment and planned services, George said. However, the contract was awarded without proper bidding, likely because of the family connection. The issue with the unpermitted construction was separate, but it fits the pattern of Patricia cutting corners and ignoring proper procedures. Jennifer, my neighbor, raised her hand. So if Cameron hadn't reported the permit issue, would any of this have come to light? George looked at me. Honestly, Probably not. At least not for a while longer. The permit complaint started people asking questions, which led to the deeper investigation. Cameron did this community a service, even though it wasn't popular at the time. Several people turned to look at me. I saw various expressions: embarrassment, gratitude, apology. Jennifer caught my eye and mouthed, "Sorry." I nodded to her. The board voted to file a criminal complaint against Patricia with the district attorney's office. They also voted to pursue civil litigation to recover the misappropriated funds. The HOA's insurance policy had coverage for this sort of thing, which meant the legal costs would be covered. About 6 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, I was having coffee on my back patio when I saw police cars pull up in front of Patricia's house. 2 officers went to the door, and after a few minutes, Patricia emerged in handcuffs. Her husband followed, looking devastated. They put her in the back of a patrol car and drove away. The arrest was for embezzlement, fraud, and theft. The district attorney had reviewed the audit findings and decided there was sufficient evidence to press charges. Patricia was later released on bail, but the damage to her reputation was total and irreversible. Her brother-in-law, who owned the playground company, was also charged as an accomplice. It turned out that the $15,000 payment had been for equipment that was worth maybe $8,000 at retail. The rest had been kicked back to Patricia in cash. Investigators found records of similar arrangements with several other contractors. The legal process ground on for months. Patricia's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA's office was not particularly interested in being lenient. Eventually, Patricia pleaded guilty to multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud. She was sentenced to 3 years in state prison, ordered to pay full restitution of $87,000, and permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership position. Her brother-in-law got 2 years and also had to pay restitution. Donald Burke, the other board member, was not charged criminally, but he faced a civil lawsuit from the HOA for failing in his oversight duties. That case was eventually settled, with Donald agreeing to pay $20,000 from his personal funds. As for the playground, once the legal dust settled and new board leadership was in place, we started the project over from scratch. This time, we filed for all the proper permits, got engineering reviews, and put the contract out for competitive bidding. We ended up with a different contractor who did excellent work. The playground opened on a sunny Saturday in September, 7 months after the original construction had been shut down. The whole community turned out for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. George, who had been officially elected as president in a special election, gave a short speech about the importance of doing things right and the value of transparency in community governance. Jennifer brought her kids, who immediately ran for the swings. She came over to me with a grateful smile. "I owe you an apology. I was so angry at you back when this started, but you were right. If we had just let that construction go forward, who knows what other problems would have continued." "I appreciate that," I said. "I know I wasn't the most popular person for a while there." "You did the right thing, even when it was hard," she said. "That takes real courage. This playground is better because of you, and honestly, this whole community is better because someone finally stood up to Patricia." I watched kids climbing and playing, their laughter filling the air. The playground had been built to code, inspected properly, and certified safe. Every post was sunk to the proper depth, every bolt was torqued to specification, every safety surface met current standards. It might have taken longer to get here, but we had done it right. Marcus came over with a beer for me and one for himself. "To whistleblowing," he said, raising his bottle. "To doing things properly," I countered, clinking my bottle against his. "Same thing, really," Marcus said with a grin. George joined us, looking tired, but satisfied. "You know, Cameron, when you first moved in, I never would have pegged you as the guy who would take down the HOA president and expose a major embezzlement scheme." "I never would have pegged myself for that either," I admitted. "I just wanted a playground with permits." "Sometimes the small things lead to big changes," George said. "You stood on principle when it would have been easier to stay quiet. A lot of people would have just let it go." "My dad always said that if something is worth doing, it's worth doing right," I said. I guess that stuck with me. The 3 of us stood there, watching the community we had fought for come together in celebration. It had been a long, difficult road, full of conflict and stress and moments when I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. But looking at those kids playing safely on a properly constructed and permitted playground, I knew it had been worth it. The HOA operated differently under George's leadership. There was transparency, proper procedures were followed, and financial decisions were made openly with input from the community. We never did recover all of the money Patricia had stolen. She had spent most of it, and what she had left went to her legal defense. But the HOA insurance covered a portion of the loss, and the settlement with Donald helped too. Property values in Riverside Glen actually went up after the scandal broke and was resolved. Potential buyers saw a community that had rooted out corruption and established good governance, which was attractive. The playground became a selling point, a symbol of what the community could accomplish when it worked together properly. As for me, I settled into my role as a somewhat unlikely community advocate. I did not run for the HOA board. I had no interest in that level of involvement. But I stayed engaged and kept asking questions when things did not seem right. And this time, when I raised concerns, people listened. One evening, about a year after everything had settled, I was walking past the playground on my way home from a run. A couple I did not know well was there with their toddler. The father was helping his daughter climb the ladder to the slide while the mother watched nervously. "First time at the playground?" I asked. The mother smiled. "Yeah, we just moved in last month. Everyone says this playground is the best one in the area. Really well built, apparently." "It is," I said. "It's got all the right permits and everything." She laughed. "Is that usually in doubt?" "You would be surprised," I said with a grin. "Enjoy your evening." As I walked home, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The playground was there, safe and sound, full of happy kids and relieved parents. The HOA was functioning properly, with honest leadership and transparent finances. The community was stronger for having gone through the fire together. I had never set out to be a hero or a whistleblower. I had just been a guy who thought permits mattered, who believed rules existed for good reasons, and who could not stay silent when he saw something wrong. That simple decision to make a phone call to county code enforcement had set off a chain of events that changed everything. Sometimes doing the right thing is easy and popular. Sometimes it is hard and makes you enemies. But it is always worth doing. The playground stood as a testament to that principle. Every properly installed bolt and correctly poured foundation, a reminder that shortcuts are never worth the risk, and that integrity matters more than convenience. As I reached my house and looked back toward the common area, I could still hear the distant sounds of children playing, their joy echoing through the neighborhood. That sound, more than anything else, told me that every difficult moment had been justified. We had built something good, something right, something that would serve the community for years to come. And it all started because someone had the audacity to build a playground without a single permit, and I had the stubbornness to report it. Sometimes life works out in unexpected ways. Sometimes standing alone leads to standing together. And sometimes a simple call to code enforcement can change everything. The sun was setting over Riverside Glen as I went inside, the golden light painting everything in warm tones. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, new opportunities to make sure things were done right. But tonight, I could rest easy, knowing that when it mattered, I had stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. That playground would be there for decades, serving generations of children, built on a foundation not just of concrete and steel, but of principles and integrity. And every time I walked past it, I would remember that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply insist that the rules everyone agreed to actually mean something. In the end, that was what community was really about, not just living near each other, but holding each other accountable, doing right by each other, and building something together that would last. Patricia had forgotten that in her quest for power and profit, but the rest of us had remembered, and Riverside Glen was better for it. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at my kitchen table, looking at the framed photo of my father that I kept there. He had been a building inspector for 30 years, a man who believed deeply in the importance of codes and standards and doing things properly. I like to think he would have been proud of how I handled the situation, even if it had been messy and difficult. "Thanks, Dad," I said quietly to the photo. "You taught me well." Outside, the last light faded from the sky, and the playground lights clicked on automatically, illuminating the structure so kids could play into the evening. Those lights had been part of the proper electrical permit, installed by a licensed electrician, inspected and approved. Everything as it should be. I smiled to myself and opened my laptop to catch up on some work. Life in Riverside Glen had returned to normal, or rather, to a new and better normal. The drama was over, justice had been served, and the community had learned valuable lessons about governance, accountability, and the importance of speaking up when something is not right. It had been quite a journey from that Tuesday morning when I first saw construction equipment rolling down the street to this peaceful evening a year later. But every step had been necessary, every conflict had served a purpose, and every difficult moment had led us to this better place. Oi, oi. As I worked, I occasionally glanced out the window toward where the playground stood, a monument to the principle that doing things right matters, even when it is hard, even when it is unpopular, even when it costs you friendships and peace of mind. Some things are worth fighting for, and a safe place for children to play is definitely one of them. The story of the unpermitted playground had become something of a legend in Riverside Glen. New residents heard about it, usually in an abbreviated form that made me sound either like a hero or a villain, depending on who was telling it. But those of us who had lived through it knew the truth. It was not about heroism or villainy, but about ordinary people trying to do the right thing in a complicated situation. And in the end, we had succeeded. The playground was built, the community was stronger, and justice had been served. You could not ask for much more than that. As I finally shut down my computer and headed to bed, I felt grateful for the whole messy experience. It had taught me things about courage, persistence, and community that I never would have learned otherwise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, all was well in Riverside Glen. The playground stood ready for another day of joy and laughter, and I could sleep soundly, knowing I had played my part in making that possible. Sometimes being the guy who insists on permits is not glamorous, but it is necessary, and in the end, it is worth it.